The small cafe sat quietly on the corner of the street, bathed in soft morning sunlight that filtered through the dusty windows. Inside, the tables were neatly arranged, the chairs pushed in just so, and a faint smell of coffee and freshly baked bread lingered in the air. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved with careful steps, her movements precise but gentle. She was shy by nature, a quiet presence among the bustling cafe, and she liked it that way. The quiet suited her, and she liked the rhythm of her routine. Every morning, she arrived early, before most customers, to prepare the cafe. She wiped down tables, polished the counter, and made sure every cup and saucer gleamed. She arranged the pastries in neat rows, each one perfectly placed, as if she were setting up a display for some invisible audience. She hummed softly to herself as she worked a melody that no one else heard, a private song that made her mornings brighter. It was in these quiet moments that she felt most at home. She wore a simple uniform, a crisp apron over her plain clothes, and her hair was tied back neatly. She didn't care about standing out or drawing attention. She liked blending into the background, moving quietly, and doing her work well. Customers often commented on her politeness, the way she remembered their favorite drinks and pastries, and her soft-spoken greetings. Some thought she was shy or even distant, but those who paid attention could see the careful kindness in her eyes. The cafe had a piano in the corner, an old upright with polished wood that gleamed in the sunlight. It had been there for years, mostly untouched. The owner sometimes joked that it had more dust than music, but the waitress knew better. She had touched the keys before, secretly when no one was around. She loved the feel of the smooth ivory beneath her fingers and the gentle resonance of the notes. Music was her private world, a place where she could express herself without words. She never played in front of others, not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid. Afraid of judgment, of making mistakes, of breaking the quiet comfort of the cafe with her own presence. Her days passed in a familiar rhythm. She would take orders with a polite smile, carry trays carefully through the narrow aisles, and pour coffee with steady hands. She listened to the conversations around her, the soft laughter, the clinking of cups and saucers, and the occasional murmur of a tired customer. She liked to watch people, to notice the little things, the way someone sipped their tea, the way a child's eyes lit up when offered a cookie, the way couples held hands across the table. These small observations filled her world, even as she kept her own thoughts to herself. Some days were busier than others. On weekends, the cafe buzzed with activity. Orders came in fast, phones rang, and chairs scraped against the wooden floor. She moved swiftly, but quietly, avoiding collisions, making sure every order was correct. She learned to anticipate the needs of the customers, to notice when someone needed a refill or an extra napkin without being asked. It was a skill she had honed over time, a combination of observation and quiet intuition. Despite her shyness, she had a way of connecting with people. A smile here, a gentle word there, a small gesture of kindness could make someone's day. She remembered faces and names, the little details about each customer. And people came back because they felt noticed and cared for. She didn't speak loudly or demand attention. She simply existed in a way that made others feel at ease. It was a quiet power, one she didn't even recognize in herself. Between serving customers, she stole moments to glance at the piano. She imagined her fingers moving across the keys, creating melodies that could fill the room with emotion. Sometimes she would tap a few notes when no one was watching, just enough to hear the sound without drawing attention. Each note felt like a secret, a small piece of herself that she kept safe. Music had always been her refuge, a way to escape the noise of the world and the awkwardness she sometimes felt in social situations. Her shyness was not a burden. It was part of who she was. She enjoyed the quiet, the routines, and the small moments of beauty in her life. Yet, deep down, she longed for something more. She dreamed of playing the piano in front of others, of letting her music speak for her when words could not. The thought made her heart race and her palms sweat. It was a desire she held tightly, almost afraid to acknowledge it, for fear that it might shatter the delicate balance of her world. Her co-workers liked her, though they sometimes wished she would speak up more. She listened more than she talked, observed more than she participated, and quietly supported those around her. She had a gentle influence, smoothing tensions with her calm presence and steady work. People trusted her, relied on her, and often came to her with small concerns or questions. Knowing she would listen patiently, one rainy morning, the cafe was quieter than usual. The soft patter of raindrops against the windows created a soothing rhythm, almost like a drum accompanying a silent melody. She moved through the cafe with her usual care, arranging chairs and wiping down counters. The smell of coffee mixed with the fresh scent of rain, and she felt a small thrill of contentment. There was something magical about these quiet mornings, a sense that anything could happen, even if she wasn't yet ready for it. She paused by the piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. The notes rang softly, filling the empty space with a delicate sound. She closed her eyes, imagining the music spreading through the cafe, touching everyone who sat at the tables. In that moment, she felt a connection to something larger than herself, a feeling of possibility that made her heart lift. It was a fleeting sensation, quickly replaced by her usual hesitation. But it lingered in the back of her mind as the day progressed. The cafe filled with the usual mix of customers, people coming for their morning coffee, students studying quietly in the corner, and a few tourists stopping by to escape the rain. She moved among them with practiced ease, taking orders, refilling cups, and offering small smiles. Each interaction, no matter how brief, left a subtle mark on her day, a reminder that even in her quiet life, she was part of the world around her. Lunch brought a flurry of activity. Plates clattered, orders were called out, and she navigated the crowded space with careful attention. Her shyness did not hinder her efficiency. If anything, it made her more focused, more attuned to the needs of others. She noticed when someone seemed lost, offered a suggestion without being intrusive, and handled small crises with a calm demeanor. The cafe ran smoothly under her watchful eye, though she remained largely invisible in the background. During a brief lull, she allowed herself another glance at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, almost as if she were weighing the possibility of playing. She imagined the notes carrying through the cafe, a melody that could surprise and delight the customers. The thought made her pulse quicken, a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew that one day she might take that step, but for now, the music remained her private companion. A secret kept safely in the corner of the cafe. By late afternoon, the cafe began to quiet down. The students packed up their books, tourists wandered off into the rain, and the regulars lingered just long enough to finish their drinks. She moved through the space methodically, wiping down tables, restocking supplies, and preparing for the evening shift. The rhythm of her work was comforting, a familiar pattern that allowed her to focus on small details and personal thoughts. As she tidied the final corner of the cafe, she paused once more by the piano. The sunlight had shifted, casting warm beams across the polished wood. She placed her hands on the keys, pressing a few notes softly, almost timidly. The sound filled the quiet room, resonating in a way that made her heart swell. She imagined the cafe filled with people listening. Captivated by the music, and for a brief moment, she felt the thrill of stepping into the light, of letting her talent be known. But she quickly withdrew. Stepping back from the piano and letting her hands fall to her sides, the fear of judgment returned, mingled with a sense of longing. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that one day, perhaps soon, she would find the courage to share her music. For now, she returned to her work, moving quietly through the cafe, a gentle presence in a world that often overlooked the shy, the quiet, and the reserved. Even as the day ended and the last customer left, she lingered for a moment, gazing at the piano. She knew that the music inside her was waiting, patient and persistent. She would return tomorrow and the next day, and perhaps someday, the world would hear what she had kept hidden for so long. Until then, she embraced the quiet, the routine, and the small joys of her life, knowing that her time would come, and when it did, silence would fall instantly, and everyone would listen. After the cafe quieted down, the waitress walked home slowly. Letting her mind drift to thoughts, she rarely spoke aloud. Music had always been a refuge for her, a a place where her emotions could exist freely without the need for words. At her small apartment, she had a modest piano tucked into a corner. It was not grand, but it had character, with slightly yellowed keys and a soft, familiar tone that felt like an old friend. Here in the privacy of her home, she could lose herself in the music. Letting her fingers glide across the keys without fear or hesitation, she settled into the bench, her back straight, fingers poised. The quiet of the room enveloped her as she began to play. At first, the notes were hesitant, like a whisper testing the air. Then they grew bolder, weaving into a melody that seemed to rise naturally from her heart. Each note carried a fragment of her personality, her shyness, her hope, her longing. The music transformed her, giving voice to feelings she often buried under polite smiles and quiet gestures. She had been learning piano since childhood, though not in a formal setting. Her parents had encouraged her interest, giving her small lessons and a lot of space to explore. Over the years, she taught herself more and more, following sheet music, copying melodies she loved, and experimenting with sounds that moved her. Her apartment, small as it was, became her personal concert hall. The piano, the centerpiece of her private world. As she played, memories surfaced. She remembered a music teacher from years ago who had seen something special in her fingers and encouraged her to dream bigger. But life had a way of quieting those dreams. She had needed a job to support herself, and working at the cafe had become her reality. Music became her secret companion, hidden flame she nurtured quietly while keeping the world at a polite distance. Her talent had grown in secret. She knew she could play complex pieces, improvise melodies that captured emotions, and evoke feelings from anyone who listened. Yet the fear of judgment had always held her back. She imagined what it would be like to perform for others. Some faces would light up. Some would be indifferent, and some might even laugh. That thought alone was enough to keep her from stepping into the light, to remain in the shadows where she felt safe. She closed her eyes, letting her fingers move freely, creating music that was raw and honest. The melody flowed, carrying with it the weight of her inner life, the moments of joy she rarely shared, the pangs of loneliness, the thrill of secret dreams. Music became her voice, her confidant, her escape. It was here she could be truly herself, without apology or explanation. Yet, even in this private sanctuary, she felt a pull toward something more. She imagined playing in public, the notes filling a room, reaching people in ways words could not. She pictured the cafe filled with patrons listening in awe, the silence wrapping around her music, the sudden recognition of her talent. Her heart raced at the thought, but so did her anxiety. What if she failed? What if her hands trembled and the melody faltered? These fears were like shadows, following her even into the sanctuary of her home. Despite her hesitation, she continued to practice every day. Each session was a small step toward courage, a private rehearsal for a dream she barely admitted even to herself. She experimented with different styles, from classical pieces that demanded precision to gentle improvisations that flowed like a conversation. Each note was a tiny victory. Each melody, a reaffirmation that she had something unique to offer. Sometimes she recorded her playing on her phone, listening later to the music she had created. The recordings were not perfect, but they captured something real: emotion, tension, and the unmistakable stamp of her personality. Listening to them, she felt pride mixed with longing. She wanted to share this gift, yet the fear of stepping into the world beyond her apartment held her back at the cafe. She often found herself observing music in others. When a customer played a tune on the piano, or when soft music drifted from someone's phone, she studied the movements, the expressions, the connection between the musician and the audience. She absorbed every detail, learning silently, imagining how she would translate that energy into her own playing. These moments became lessons in subtlety, emotion, and presence. She also drew inspiration from her surroundings. From the gentle rhythms of the cafe, the clatter of cups, the soft murmur of conversation, the laughter that occasionally erupted from a corner table, these sounds became part of her mental compositions, the everyday noises shaping her sense of timing, phrasing, and expression. Music, for her, was not separate from life. It was woven into every observed detail, every small interaction. Some evenings, after the cafe closed, she would return to the piano and play for hours, losing herself in the music until her fingers ached and her mind quieted. These sessions were meditative, a blend of passion and discipline, where she honed her technique and explored her imagination. She discovered patterns, experimented with harmonies, and allowed herself to be vulnerable through sound. Each note was a reflection of her journey, shy, hesitant, yet quietly determined. Her love for music also connected her to a sense of possibility. She dreamed of performing in a small venue, perhaps a local event or a community gathering, where her music could touch real people. She imagined the nervous excitement of the first note, the collective intake of breath, the hush of anticipation, and the eventual warmth of applause. In her mind, she played over and over, rehearsing not just the music, but the courage it would take to share it. Yet the fear remained. Each time she imagined stepping into the light, her thoughts raced with doubts. Would people understand the emotion in her music? Would they notice the care and love she poured into each note? Would she falter under scrutiny? These questions were heavy, but they did not extinguish the spark within her. Instead, they challenged her to keep practicing, to keep building a private strength that could one day overcome hesitation. She also found solace in the stories of others, musicians who had started quietly, hidden in shadows before being discovered. Reading about their journeys, she realized that talent alone was not enough. Courage, persistence, and timing played vital roles. She began to see herself as part of a larger tradition of artists who had dared to share their voices despite fear. This perspective became a quiet motivation, a reminder that her dreams were valid and achievable. The balance between her shyness and her talent defined much of her life. At work, she remained gentle, observant, and polite, a quiet presence that served others. At home, she became bold, expressive, and free, exploring the full range of her abilities through the piano. Each life informed the other. The discipline and empathy from her job enhanced her musicality, while the creativity and emotion from her music enriched her interactions with customers. She existed in these parallel worlds, navigating the delicate space between fear and expression. Her piano became a mirror of her inner life, reflecting both her strengths and her insecurities. Some days she played flawlessly, confident in her movements and choices. Other days she stumbled, notes clashing or melodies faltering, reminding her of the vulnerability inherent in creation. She learned to accept both the successes and the mistakes, understanding that each was part of the journey toward mastery and self-expression. Occasionally, she shared small snippets of her music with close friends or trusted coworkers, testing the waters of exposure. Their encouragement was gentle and heartfelt. Yet she always retreated quickly to her private space, wary of public scrutiny. She realized that sharing her talent was not a single act, but a gradual process, one that required patience, trust, and inner courage. As weeks passed, her confidence grew subtly. She started experimenting with small improvisations during quieter moments at the cafe, pressing notes softly on the corner piano when no one was around. The sound was delicate but deliberate, a silent rehearsal for an audience she imagined but did not yet face. Each note was a whisper of possibility, a promise to herself that one day she would no longer play in secrecy. Even in her most private moments, she envisioned the future. She imagined the cafe filled with people, the air vibrating with anticipation, and the moment when she would lift her hands to the keys and let the music speak. The thought was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, a blend of fear and hope that kept her heart beating with quiet intensity. She knew that the journey was far from over, but the desire to share her music burned steadily, a flame she was determined to protect and nurture. Through it all, she remained grounded in her daily life. She continued her work at the cafe with care and attention, maintaining the balance between the ordinary and the extraordinary. She learned to live with her shyness, understanding that it did not diminish her talent but coexisted with it, creating a depth of character and sensitivity that enhanced her music. Her life was a quiet blend of observation, service, and creativity, each element feeding the other. Each day a preparation for the moment when she would finally step into the light in the privacy of her apartment. As her fingers traced the keys and melodies filled the room, she felt a sense of completeness. Here she was free. Here she was brave. Here, the shy waitress could become the musician she longed to be. The music carried her forward, each note a step toward courage. Each melody a bridge between who she was and who she hoped to become. It was in these moments, alone but alive, that she understood the true power of her gift and the quiet determination that would one day make the world stop and listen. The cafe buzzed unusually on that Saturday evening. The usual soft chatter and aroma of coffee had been replaced by a subtle excitement. A local group of musicians was scheduled to meet there, using the corner piano for practice before a small community event. The waitress noticed the extra crowd as she moved carefully between the tables, refilling cups and taking orders. Her hands trembled slightly as she remembered the piano in the corner, its polished keys glinting. Under the warm lights, she felt both nervous and drawn to it, a feeling she had long tried to ignore. She continued her work quietly, observing the musicians from a distance. They laughed and joked among themselves, their fingers flying across the piano keys with skill and confidence. She admired their ease, the way they expressed themselves so freely. A pang of longing struck her heart. She had practiced countless hours alone, yet the thought of playing in front of others made her stomach twist in knots. Still, she couldn't look away. Each note they played resonated within her, awakening a desire she could no longer suppress. The cafe owner approached her with a friendly smile. "We might have a problem tonight," he said softly. "The pianist who was supposed to play at the event called in sick. I don't know what we'll do." Her heart skipped a beat. She swallowed, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. The thought of being asked to play in front of others terrified her. She shook her head subtly, hoping he wouldn't notice her reaction. But he did.
"Don't worry,"
he said gently. "If you can help out, it would be amazing. We don't need perfection. Just something to fill the space and keep the music alive." Her mind raced. The piano at home, the hours of practice, the melodies she had created in private, they all seemed to gather around her in a quiet insistence. Could she do it? Could she play in front of strangers, in a room filled with people who might judge every note? Fear gripped her, yet a small spark of courage flickered within. She nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, and followed him toward the piano. Her hands felt heavy, her breath shallow. She took a seat on the bench, her fingers hovering above the keys. The cafe seemed to fade around her, the chatter and laughter dissolving into silence in her mind. All that existed was the piano and the music that had lived in her heart for so long. The first note she pressed was tentative, almost afraid to make a sound. It rang out softly and she winced, expecting disapproval. But the room remained quiet, the patrons unaware of her inner turmoil. She pressed another key and another, each note gaining strength and confidence. Slowly a melody emerged, delicate and expressive, carrying with it every hidden thought, every secret dream she had held for years. The musicians nearby paused, noticing the sound. One of them smiled and nodded in encouragement, recognizing the skill behind the tentative notes. The waitress allowed herself a small breath, realizing that her fingers remembered what her mind had feared. She let the music flow, each note finding its place in a melody that felt both new and familiar. The cafe seemed to hold its breath, as if the room itself was waiting to see what would unfold. Customers stopped talking. Cups paused in midair, and even the owner leaned against the counter, watching in quiet awe. The shy waitress, once invisible among the crowd, was now commanding attention with nothing but her music. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, improvising and interpreting in ways that reflected her inner life. The melody was a conversation with herself, a dialogue that had been waiting years to be spoken aloud. As the minutes passed, she began to feel a transformation. The fear that had gripped her melted away, replaced by a sense of freedom and purpose. She was no longer the quiet waitress in the background. She was a musician, a storyteller, an artist whose voice came through the piano. The music expressed everything words could not. Her shyness, her hope, her longing, her courage. The room responded in kind. Patrons leaned closer, listening intently. A few whispered to each other, astonished by the skill and emotion pouring from the piano. The musicians, once the center of attention, now watched her with admiration, recognizing the rare gift she was sharing. The cafe, usually a place of ordinary routine, became a stage for something extraordinary. She closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. Memories of her private practice sessions, the quiet hours at home, and the longings she had kept hidden, all converged in this moment. Each note carried emotion, each phrase a reflection of her life. The music swelled, filling the corners of the room, wrapping around every listener and drawing them into her world. A customer, an elderly woman who came often to the cafe, placed her hand over her heart, moved by the melody. A young couple exchanged amazed glances, realizing they were witnessing something rare. Even the cafe owner, usually focused on logistics and orders, felt a shiver run down his spine. The shy waitress had become the center of attention. Not through words or gestures, but through the pure power of music. Her confidence continued to grow as she played. The trembling in her hands disappeared, replaced by fluid motion and certainty. She experimented with dynamics, softening some passages and letting others ring boldly, shaping the music with an instinct born of years of practice. Improvisation became her ally, allowing her to express emotions that had no other outlet. She realized that the fear she had felt for so long was simply a barrier waiting to be crossed, and with each note she stepped further beyond it. The cafe's atmosphere changed. The usual background noise, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation faded into insignificance. People listened, rapt and attentive, as if the music had created a temporary sanctuary within the room. Even those who had been skeptical or indifferent found themselves caught up in the spell of her playing. The shy waitress, once unnoticed, had transformed the space with her gift. She remembered her previous private lessons, the encouragement of her past teachers, and the countless hours of solitary practice. All of it had led to this moment. She realized that talent alone was not enough. It was courage, persistence, and the willingness to face fear that had brought her here. The music became a celebration of her journey, a story told through sound, not words. Minutes felt like hours, and hours like moments. She played with abandon, letting her emotions guide her, letting the room respond naturally. The melody wound through joy, sadness, hope, and longing, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intimate and expansive. She noticed the subtle reactions of the audience, the way someone's eyes glistened, the gentle nod of appreciation, the small, involuntary smiles that accompanied the music. As she reached the final passage, she allowed the notes to linger, drawing out the conclusion with care. The last key pressed, the final sound hung in the air for a heartbeat longer than expected, and then silence fell. The room remained still, as if holding its breath, savoring the ending. It was a moment suspended in time, where the shy waitress and her piano became one, and the world outside ceased to exist. Then, slowly, applause began to rise. At first, tentative, then stronger, more confident, until the cafe was filled with clapping and murmurs of awe. The waitress opened her eyes, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had done it. She had faced her fear and shared her music with the world, if only with the few patrons in the cafe. And the experience was nothing short of transformative. The musicians nearby came over, offering genuine praise. "That was incredible," one said, eyes wide. "I didn't know you could play like that," another added. "You have such expression in your music. It's rare to see someone play with such emotion and skill." The waitress felt her heart swell with a mix of pride and humility. She smiled softly, the words catching in her throat. She had always wanted to play publicly, but the reality exceeded even her most hopeful imaginings. She realized that sharing her music was not just about performance. It was about connection, about touching lives, about finding her place in the world. The cafe owner approached once more, his eyes bright. "You were amazing. I think everyone who heard you tonight will remember it for a long time. Thank you for stepping up." She nodded, a small, shy smile spreading across her face. It was a smile that held both relief and a newfound sense of possibility. She had crossed a threshold, and though she didn't know where it would lead, she felt certain that her life had changed. The shy waitress who had once been invisible had discovered a strength within herself that was undeniable as the evening wound down. She returned to her tasks, carrying herself with a quiet confidence. The cafe hummed with a lingering energy, the music still resonating in the minds of those who had listened. She moved among the tables with the same care as always. But now, there was an extra lightness in her steps, a subtle grace that reflected the triumph she had quietly achieved. Later, after the last customer had left, she sat by the piano again, not to play, but to reflect. The room was empty, yet the echoes of her music lingered. She realized that the fear that had once seemed insurmountable was now a distant memory, replaced by excitement and anticipation for what might come next. She had taken a leap, faced the unknown, and discovered the power of her voice through her music. That night, she walked home under the soft glow of streetlights. The city seemed different. The sounds of the evening, the rustling of leaves, the distant chatter, the occasional car passing by, felt like part of a larger symphony, a world full of possibility and connection. She felt lighter, freer, as if a weight had been lifted, and she carried within her a new understanding that courage could transform fear into beauty, and that her music, long hidden, had a place in the hearts of others. The cafe had grown quiet once more after the earlier performance. Yet the memory of the music lingered in the air, like a soft echo that refused to fade. The shy waitress lingered by the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys. She had never expected the response she had received: applause, astonished faces, and sincere praise, and yet it had filled her with a quiet sense of pride she had never known before. Her world, once small and measured, had suddenly expanded in ways she hadn't imagined. She thought about how the music had connected her to the people in the room. There had been a moment when she realized she was no longer playing alone. Her fingers had become a bridge between her inner world and the lives of others. She could feel the energy of the audience, their surprise, their appreciation, and it had lifted her in a way words never could. Music had always been a refuge, a private companion, but now it had become a language, one that spoke directly to the hearts of those around her. Her reflection in the polished wood of the piano caught her eye. For the first time, she saw herself not just as the quiet waitress who served coffee, but as a musician, someone with a gift that could touch others. The realization was both exhilarating and frightening. She had always feared judgment, the idea that she might fail or appear foolish, yet the room had responded with warmth and wonder. The silence that had followed the final note had been heavy with attention, not criticism. And that silence had spoken more powerfully than applause ever could. She remembered the small gestures from the audience, the way an elderly woman's hand had moved to her heart, the young couple's amazed expressions, the nods of the other musicians. Each reaction was a thread connecting her music to real people, tangible proof that what she created mattered. The realization was profound, reshaping the quiet, self-contained world she had lived in for so long. In the following days, the memory of that evening played over in her mind like a cherished melody. She replayed the performance in detail, recalling the exact notes, the flow of the music, the rhythm, and the pauses. Every time she thought about it, a small thrill ran through her, reminding her of what she had accomplished. She began to notice subtle changes in herself, the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence in her movements, the light in her eyes that came from knowing she had done something remarkable. Back at the cafe, her colleagues noticed the change as well. There was a new energy in her presence, a soft radiance that made her seem more alive, more assured. They commented on her calm authority and the gentle way she moved through the busy space. She smiled softly at their words, realizing that the courage she had found through music had spilled over into her everyday life. The shy waitress was still there. She was no longer confined by fear. She continued to practice privately at home, her passion for the piano deepening with every session. But now, she approached her music with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She began to experiment more boldly, trying complex pieces, improvising with freedom, pushing her skills further than ever. The piano, once a private refuge, had become a proving ground, a place where she could grow not just as a musician, but as a person. The cafe itself seemed to embrace this new chapter. Patrons began to inquire more often about the piano, occasionally asking if she would play. Each request sent a ripple of nervousness through her, but it also carried the thrill of possibility. The memory of that first public performance gave her courage, a reminder that she could rise above fear and create beauty in the presence of others. She began to accept these small requests, playing soft melodies during quieter hours, watching as customers responded with smiles, gentle applause, or simply attentive silence. One afternoon, a local music teacher entered the cafe and listened quietly as she played. When the piece ended, the teacher approached, eyes bright with admiration. "You have a natural gift," the teacher said. "Your music carries emotion in a way that's rare. Have you considered performing more publicly?" The waitress shook her head, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "I've always been too afraid," she admitted softly. "I practice at home, but playing for others, it's different." The teacher's expression was kind but insistent. "You have a voice that deserves to be heard. Music is about connection, and you already have that. It's time to share it more widely." Her heart fluttered. She thought of the previous evening, of the quiet hush that had fallen over the cafe, of the stunned faces of those who had listened. She realized the truth of the teacher's words. Her music had power, not just to express her feelings, but to touch the lives of others. The idea of more public performance was both thrilling and intimidating, but the seed of courage had been planted, and it began to grow. That night she returned home and sat at her piano, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the shy girl who had entered the cafe years ago, invisible and quiet, who had spent countless hours in solitude, practicing in secret. The contrast between that girl and the musician she was becoming was striking. She had faced fear, crossed thresholds, and discovered a capacity for expression she had almost forgotten existed. As she played, she allowed herself to imagine the future. She pictured small performances at local events, perhaps in community centers, cafes, or gatherings. She imagined the audience listening intently, the silence falling as her fingers moved across the keys, the music resonating in ways that words could never match. Each scenario filled her with both excitement and a tremor of nervous anticipation, but the thrill was undeniable. She knew that she was ready to take these steps, that the shy waitress within her had been transformed by the power of her music. Her confidence began to influence other areas of her life. She engaged more with customers, offering small conversations and warm smiles that were genuine rather than polite. She became more assertive in her work, taking initiative and handling challenges with calm composure. The quiet power she had discovered through her music radiated outward, enriching every interaction and leaving a subtle but noticeable impression on those around her. She also began to keep a journal of her musical journey, noting each piece she practiced, the techniques she explored, and the emotions she wished to convey. Writing about her experiences allowed her to reflect on her growth and clarify her goals. She realized that the journey was not just about playing the piano, but about discovering herself, building confidence, and embracing the courage to share her gift with the world. Word began to spread quietly about the waitress who could play piano with such emotion and skill. Regular customers mentioned it to friends, and occasionally strangers stopped by to hear her play. Each new listener brought a mix of excitement and nerves, yet she welcomed the opportunity. She discovered that the more she played in front of others, the easier it became. And the more joy she derived from the connection music created. The shy waitress who had once feared judgment was now learning to embrace it, not as a threat, but as a part of sharing herself. Each performance, small or significant, became a step toward understanding that her value was not diminished by the presence of others, but enhanced by it. Her music had become a bridge, connecting her private world with the wider world, and she reveled in the beauty of that connection. In these moments, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Music was no longer just an escape or a private passion. It was a medium through which she could express herself fully and authentically. she had discovered that silence could carry power. That hesitation could transform into expression, and that courage could emerge quietly, almost imperceptibly. Before blossoming into something extraordinary, she spent hours at the piano each day, practicing with renewed purpose and energy. She experimented with new styles, learned pieces that challenged her abilities, and improvised melodies that reflected her evolving emotions. The music became a companion, a guide, and a source of inspiration. Each note she played reinforced her sense of identity, reminding her of how far she had come from the timid girl who had once been too afraid to play in front of anyone. The impact of her music extended beyond the cafe. Some listeners shared their experience with friends and family, spreading word of the waitress who played piano with depth and emotion. Invitations to perform at small gatherings or local events began to arrive, offering opportunities to step further into the public sphere. Each invitation was a mixture of excitement and apprehension, but she approached them with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had already crossed the most difficult threshold, that of first sharing her music with others. Through it all, she remained grounded in her humility. She never sought the spotlight, and she continued to serve at the cafe with the same care and attentiveness as before. Yet there was a new lightness in her presence, a subtle aura of someone who had discovered her voice and embraced it. She understood that the journey was ongoing, that each performance, each interaction, and each note played was a step forward in a lifelong pursuit of self-expression and connection, even in moments of doubt. She returned to the piano with determination. She reminded herself that fear was natural, that hesitation was part of growth, and that the music itself was a teacher, guiding her toward courage and authenticity. The shy waitress and the musician coexisted within her, each informing and supporting the other, creating a balance that was both delicate and strong. As the weeks turned into months, her reputation as a pianist grew quietly,